The Heir of Stroma, Scotland's abandoned island, hides a terrifying secret. From as far back as he could remember, Alistair Macrae had felt an inexplicable pull toward the remote island of Stroma. Though he had never truly known it, the lonely isle seemed to inhabit his thoughts like a half-forgotten dream. Its abandoned stone cottages, their roofs long surrendered to the relentless Scottish winds, and its empty fields stretching beneath vast grey skies, appeared to call to him across the restless waters of the Pentland Firth. Whenever he stood on the Caithness coast and gazed toward its distant silhouette, he felt as though the island was watching him in return, silently waiting for his arrival. To others, Stroma was little more than a deserted relic, a place where generations had struggled against isolation, unforgiving seas, and the slow march of time before finally abandoning it. But to Alistair, it was something altogether different. It felt alive, steeped in memories he could not explain, bound to him by threads he could neither see nor understand. The stories of the island, whispered by old fishermen and passed down through fading family legends, stirred something deep within him, filling him with an irresistible longing to uncover the truth. When news came that he was the rightful heir to Stroma, Alistair accepted it as the answer to a question he had been asking his entire life. It seemed impossible to dismiss the discovery as mere coincidence. Surely fate had been guiding him toward the island all along, preparing him to reclaim what had always been his, by blood and by birthright. He embraced his inheritance with excitement and quiet reverence, convinced that he was stepping into the life he had been destined to lead. He could not have been more mistaken, for the island had indeed been waiting for him, but not out of love, nor out of longing. Stroma guarded secrets older than memory, darker than any tale told around a fireside. Beneath its silence lay something patient, something ancient, and something that had never truly left. Alistair believed he had inherited an island. Instead, he had inherited a nightmare. The journal Alistair discovered lay hidden beneath the collapsed timbers of an abandoned croft, wrapped in rotting oilskin, as though someone had gone to great lengths to ensure it survived. Its brittle pages smelled of damp peat and salt, the ink faded by decades of neglect. At first, it appeared to be nothing more than the diary of an islander, a simple record of hard lives lived on the edge of the sea. It spoke of failed harvests, violent storms, dwindling fishing catches, and the heartbreaking departure of families, forced to abandon the island in search of a better future on the mainland. Yet, as Alistair read deeper into its pages, the tone began to change. The careful handwriting grew increasingly uneven, as if the writer's composure had slowly unraveled. Whole passages had been scratched out, replaced with hurried notes crammed into the margins. Words were underlined so heavily they had nearly torn through the paper. The final entries seemed less like a diary and more like desperate warnings meant for anyone unfortunate enough to find them. One passage, written in jagged, frantic strokes, seized Alistair's attention. As he read it, he was certain he could almost hear an ancient voice speaking the words written on the page.
The sea does not forgive. The island is not ours to keep. We leave, or we are taken.
There were others.
Do not answer when the tide calls your name. After the third bell, bar every door and shutter every window. Pray that it passes by. We buried nothing. It returned itself to the sea.
The official histories claimed that Stroma had been abandoned because life had simply become too difficult. Isolation, economic decline, and the relentless hardships of island living had driven its people away. That was the story preserved in books and government records. The journal told a different story. Its people had endured hunger, storms, and loneliness for generations. Those hardships alone would never have broken them. What finally drove them from their homes was something far older and far more terrifying than poverty. Something that came with the tide. Something the islanders had learned never to name. Something that still waited beneath the dark waters of the Pentland Firth, where the currents churned endlessly around Stroma's rocky shores. And if the journal was to be believed, it had never stopped waiting. The voices came with the darkness. At first, Alistair dismissed them as tricks of the wind. Stroma was never truly silent. The Pentland Firth roared endlessly against the cliffs, and the old cottages groaned beneath the weight of the Atlantic gales. It was easy to mistake the cry of a seabird or the mournful whistle of Heir through broken stone for something almost human. But these sounds were different. They rose from the sea in low, guttural murmurs, as though 100 unseen voices were speaking beneath the waves. He could never make out the words, only the cadence, a slow, mournful chant that seemed as ancient as the island itself. Night after night, the whispers grew louder, carrying his name on the wind with such unmistakable clarity that sleep became impossible. Unable to resist, Alistair followed them. Drawn across the moonlit fields and through the ruins of long-deserted crofts, he climbed the cliffs overlooking the restless waters below. The tide was nearing its highest point, the sea churning white against the black rocks. At first he saw nothing but the shifting foam. Then the water began to move. Dark shapes emerged from the surf, rising with unnatural slowness. One by one they climbed from the sea, not disturbing the waves that birthed them. They were unmistakably human, yet horribly wrong. Their skin was as pale as bleached bone, stretched tightly across waterlogged flesh. Seaweed clung to their limbs like funeral shrouds, while shells and barnacles had become part of their bodies. Hollow eyes stared without blinking, reflecting no light, and when they opened their mouths, seawater poured endlessly onto the rocks instead of breath. None of them spoke, yet Alistair heard them all the same. Their voices echoed inside his mind, hundreds of them together, whispering in grief, in anger, in longing. They were calling him closer. As he stood frozen on the cliff's edge, fragments of the journal returned to him with terrifying clarity. At last he understood what its frantic author had tried so desperately to record before reason had abandoned him. The people of Stroma had never believed the sea was merely dangerous. They believed it was alive. For generations, the islanders had lived under an ancient covenant, offering prayers and rituals to appease the waters that surrounded them. The Pentland Firth was said to possess an insatiable hunger, claiming fishermen, mothers, children, and entire boats whenever its appetite demanded. Every drowning was accepted as a sacrifice, a terrible price that ensured the rest of the community would be spared. But something changed. The sea began taking more than its share. The dead no longer remained beneath the waves. Those claimed by the Firth returned with every rising tide, wandering the shoreline in silent procession, their empty eyes fixed upon the homes they had once known. They were neither living nor truly dead, but prisoners of the sea's endless hunger, forever bound to the island they could never leave. Realizing that no prayer, offering, or sacrifice could satisfy whatever dwelt beneath the black waters, the surviving islanders made an impossible choice. They abandoned their homes, their fields, and the graves of their ancestors, believing that only by forsaking Stroma could they break the ancient curse. They fled before the sea could claim them all. But curses do not fade, simply because people leave. They wait. And as the drowned figures slowly turned their hollow eyes toward Alistair, he understood with growing dread why the island had called him home. It had never wanted an heir. It wanted the last of the Macraes. The truth came to Alistair not in a single revelation, but in fragments that slowly assembled themselves into a nightmare from which there could be no waking. The inheritance he had fought so hard to claim was never the island itself. It was the burden that came with it. For generations, the Macraes had believed they were the custodians of Stroma, its rightful owners by blood and law. The journals, the fading parish records, and the whispered tales passed down through forgotten branches of the family all suggested otherwise. They had never owned the island. They had belonged to it. Long before deeds and titles, before the lighthouse pierced the darkness with its steady beam, the first Macrae had made a covenant with whatever ancient force dwelt beneath the racing currents of the Pentland Firth. Whether it had been struck in desperation, arrogance, or fear, was lost to history. Only its consequence remained. One bloodline would remain. One bloodline would watch. One bloodline would answer when the sea came calling. Every generation had produced a keeper, though few had understood the role they had inherited. Some died young. Others vanished without explanation. A handful fled the island, only to be drawn back by dreams they could neither resist nor explain. The sea was patient. It always reclaimed what was promised. Now it had reclaimed Alistair, and the drowned knew it. Each night they emerged with the tide, climbing silently from the black water to stand upon the shore. At first they lingered at the water's edge, their motionless forms barely visible through the mist. Then they came farther inland, their sodden footsteps leaving no mark upon the earth. With every passing night they gathered closer. Dozens became scores. Scores became hundreds. Their hollow eyes never left him. When they spoke, it was no longer inside his thoughts alone. Their voices rode upon the wind itself, layered together in a chorus that sounded like waves grinding against ancient stone.
Blood returns to wake us.
The words rolled across the island again and again.
Blood returns to wake us.
Then came the command.
And now you must stay.
There was no anger in their voices, no hatred, only certainty. The island had found its keeper at last. Desperate for refuge, Alistair retreated to Stroma's abandoned lighthouse. Its great lantern still burned, casting a brilliant arc across the black waters of the Pentland Firth. For a time, the light seemed to hold the dead at bay. Whenever its beams swept across the shoreline, the drowned recoiled into the darkness, their pale forms dissolving like mist before the dawn. Only then did Alistair understand why the lighthouse had been built where it stood. It had never existed merely to guide ships through the treacherous tides. It had been a ward, a beacon raised not only against the darkness of the sea, but against the darkness within it. As long as its light endured, the drowned could not cross its circle of protection. Night after night, Alistair climbed the worn spiral staircase to keep the ancient mechanism alive, feeding fuel into its hungry flame, praying it would never falter. Yet every evening the lamp burned a little weaker. The gears groaned with age. The reservoir dwindled. Salt and rust gnawed relentlessly at the machinery. Outside, the voices grew louder. The dead no longer waited at the shoreline. They stood upon the cliffs surrounding the lighthouse, their waterlogged faces turned toward its glowing lantern. Hundreds of hollow eyes watched the light with endless patience. They knew what Alistair now knew. No flame burns forever, and when the beacon finally died, there would be nothing left between the keeper and those who had come to claim him. The storm arrived without warning. A wall of black clouds swallowed the moon, and the wind screamed across Stroma with a fury that seemed almost alive. Waves hurled themselves against the cliffs, sending plumes of white water high into the night. The lighthouse lantern, its flame weakened by age and neglect, struggled against the darkness, each slow revolution casting a beam that grew fainter with every passing minute. Alistair stood alone at the edge of the cliffs, the sea raging below him. Beyond the rocks, the waters of the Pentland Firth churned like a living thing. Hundreds of pale figures drifted just beneath the surface, their hollow faces turned upward, waiting. Others stood motionless along the shoreline, their sodden clothes fluttering in a wind that no longer seemed to touch the living world. The whispers that had haunted him for so many nights had become voices, clear, patient, and impossibly ancient. They were no longer calling. They were welcoming him home. Every instinct urged him to flee. He could still make for the old jetty. If fortune smiled upon him, perhaps the weather would ease long enough for a boat to reach the mainland. He could abandon Stroma as the last islanders had done decades before, leaving its ruins to the sea and never looking back. But deep within his heart, he already knew the terrible truth. There was no escape. The curse was not bound to the island. It was bound to him. The inheritance that had seemed such an extraordinary stroke of fate had been nothing more than the final link in an ancient chain forged centuries before his birth. Every step that had brought him here, every coincidence, every unanswered question, every dream that had drawn his thoughts toward Stroma, had been carefully woven into a destiny from which there had never been any hope of escape. He had not found the island had found him. The journal's final page, brittle with age and stained by seawater, had contained only a single sentence. The handwriting was barely legible, as though the author had written it while trembling with terror.
The island will sleep, but one day blood will return to wake it.
Only now did Alistair understand its meaning. The people of Stroma had never broken the curse. They had merely delayed it. They had abandoned their homes, their livestock, their churches, and even the graves of their ancestors, believing that distance would buy time. They had scattered across Scotland and beyond, hoping that each new generation would forget the old stories, dismiss them as superstition, and never return. For decades, the island had slept beneath the cries of seabirds and the relentless pounding of the tides. It had waited, patiently, silently, until the blood of its keeper came home once more. The sea began to rise, not with the rhythm of an ordinary tide, but with deliberate purpose. Black water spilled over the rocks and crept across the land as though obeying an unseen command. The drowned stepped forward together, climbing the cliffs with slow, impossible grace. Their empty eyes never left Alistair's face. Then they smiled. It was not the smile of welcome. It was the smile of recognition. The wind carried their voices in a single, dreadful chorus.
You have come home.
The lighthouse lantern flickered one last time. Its beams swept across the sea, illuminating the countless faces gathered below, before fading into darkness forever. For one brief moment, the island was utterly still. Then the night erupted with the sound of the sea. Some say that on winter evenings, when the Pentland Firth is shrouded in mist, a light can still be seen moving across the abandoned cliffs of Stroma, though the lighthouse has long since fallen dark. Fishermen tell of hearing voices drifting over the water, speaking in a language no living soul remembers, and of seeing a solitary figure standing upon the headland, watching the tides with endless patience. They say he never leaves. They say he cannot. For Stroma was never abandoned. It simply waited for its keeper to return. And somewhere beneath the restless waters, where the currents conceal secrets older than memory, the island is sleeping once more, waiting for the day that blood will return to wake it again.